In the section that begins on page 504, called Beyond Color Words, we begin to see that the Whorfian hypothesis influences our perception about other areas of cognition as well. We can see in this first experiment, illustrated in figure 12.14, that if a circular series of images of dogs is presented, but there's one cat in the image, and participants are asked to identify whether there is a cat in the image or not, then they're much faster to do it if the cat is presented in the right visual field, because, as you recall from the previous recording, information from the right visual field is processed directly to the left hemisphere where the language centers of the brain are, and it's immediately processed by the language centers of the brain. But when the cat is in the left visual field, then that information is processed first through the right hemisphere, detoured over the corpus callosum into the left hemisphere of the brain, where then finally it's processed in the language centers of the brain. So it's slower. So participants are slower to realize there's a cat in the image if it's on the left-hand side. But the interesting spin on this research study was done when the researchers presented the same protocol to an individual who had had split brain surgery. And this individual showed that if the cat was in the left visual field, she was unable to process the cat as different from the dogs. She had to compare one dog to the next individually, each one as a separate entity, and couldn't group all the dogs together as dogs. But it took her a very long time to process the difference between the dogs and the cats if it was presented in the left visual field. Then we read that on the bottom of page 505 and the top of page 506, we can read that that the Whorfian hypothesis influences our perception of events as well. In English, we're more likely to encode in our linguistic utterances information about the movement of a person. We're more likely to describe people as walking or ambling or striding or trotting or running or jogging or sauntering, right? We have lots and lots of words that describe movement. But if we're going to describe the path, we have to add a prepositional phrase. This is going to be, this is going to look like the sentences presented here at the top of page 506. Nigel jogged up the hill, Kim ran into the house, Blake ambled down the street. Those are prepositional phrases added after we've already, by default, encoded information about the movement of the person into the sentence. So we're likely to pay more attention to how somebody moves. But individuals who speak Spanish or Greek are more likely to encode into their sentences information about the path, where they're going, than they are about the way that they got there, right? So essentially, Spanish and Greek have the opposite trait as English in this case. If researchers present the figure that's shown in 12.15, then people who speak English will focus on the movement. They will look at the skateboard for a longer period of time than they will look anywhere else. But people who speak Spanish or Greek will look at the end point where the path is leading, or the goal, the net, right? And they'll spend longer gazing at that than they will at the other. But interestingly, this effect only appears if the participants were primed to know that they would have to describe the event after they had looked at it. So, in other words, if the participants knew that they would have to talk about this event, then that biased how they were encoding it in their memories in the first place. They were more likely to focus on the aspects of the picture that were related to their verbal description, either the path or the movement, according to the language they spoke. But the other interesting thing is after the little snippet was shown to the participants, that the participants were likely to look for a longer period of time at the opposite of what their language would encode, knowing that they would have to process that information deeper because it's not automatically embedded in their linguistic code. So while English speakers looked at the skateboard for a longer period of time in the conditions when they were told that they would have to speak about the image, if they were after the little video was concluded, then they were more likely to spend time looking at the end goal, at the net, than they were at the skateboard, because that wasn't automatically processed and encoded or embedded in the linguistic code, in the utterance that they were already planning. So this suggests that movement is also processed differently depending on the language that we use, that we perceive it somewhat differently. And finally, one fascinating demonstration suggests that that the way we process how do I say this? The intentionality of an event is also influenced by our language. So in English, we are likely to encode in the active, we're very likely to encode in a sentence the actor of a verb. Yes, the actor of a verb, regardless of whether the action was intentional or unintentional. But people who speak Spanish are more likely to embed in a sentence the actor of the verb if it's an accident that was or if it's a damage that was intentional rather than if it was an accident. So, for instance, if a vase was broken, if individuals saw a video of a vase being broken, then in English we might say that if the woman did it, then we might say the woman broke the vase. But in Spanish, they would be more likely to say the vase was broken if it was an accident, and not to encode in that sentence the woman as the actor. So thereafter, it influenced people's memories if they were to encode the woman, or if they were not to encode the woman in the original linguistic utterance. So that suggests that that the Worthian hypothesis is at play when we're processing eyewitness testimony as well. I'll say that a different way. I'll say that the way that the language that we use may indeed process how we see a visual scene and how we remember it later, depending on what kinds of words are important in the language that we use.